Díomh Cordigalir, my name is James Nagle. Welcome to The Irish Nation Lives. Following the general election on the 14th of December, Sinn Féin was confident of a strong majority, and at a meeting of the Executive Committee on the 19th, they began preparations to convoke Dáil Éireann, the Assembly of Ireland. Michael Collins and Piaras Beasley were instructed to formally summon all Sinn Féin candidates elected to a joint meeting with the Executive on the 1st of January at the Mansion House. Here it was agreed that a secret meeting would take place on the 7th of January, at which a subcommittee of arrangements, chaired by Sean T. O'Kelly, was created to oversee the convening of the first meeting of the Dáil. Various select committees were formed to establish standing orders, the rules governing parliamentary procedure, as well as drafting the documents that would be read out on the day: the Provisional Constitution of Dáil Éireann, the Declaration of Independence, and the Message to the Free Nations of the World. Another meeting was organised for the 14th of January to consider and suggest amendments to these documents. This was also the first time that the Democratic Programme was mentioned. It's often portrayed as proof of the revolutionary socialist views of the First Dáil, but in reality that isn't the case. On the 28th of December, the Irish Labour Party had appointed delegates to the International Socialist Conference, which would take place at Bern. While they would be granted representation as an established Labour Party, their numbers would be restricted due to the fact that they had no elected representatives in Parliament, a result of their decision not to contest the 1918 election. They viewed the Democratic Programme as a way of showing Bern that they had input in the Dáil. A further private meeting on the 17th of January approved the standing orders and the Provisional Constitution, and a final inspection of the documents took place on the 20th of January. While most passed with only slight amendments, the Democratic Programme was a different matter. Sean T. O'Kelly states that at this meeting Harry Boland was only able to present a bundle of rough notes, which were handed to O'Kelly as chairman and when read out caused considerable disagreement. With the Dáil meeting the next day and no one else willing to take on the job, the task of drafting these scraps of paper into a coherent document was left to O'Kelly, who demanded and received agreement that what he produced would be accepted without argument. He headed home with hopes of peace and quiet to work, but on his arrival he found Michael Collins, Harry Boland and a number of other TDs, as he said, in high spirits. Sequestering himself in a quiet corner, O'Kelly worked until 4 in the morning. Only his wife read the document before it was taken to the printers at 10 o'clock. It's unlikely that many in Sinn Féin agreed with the statements made in the Democratic Programme, even in the Conservative version drafted by O'Kelly. Most felt that social and economic issues should be held off until the enemy was removed from the country. In effect, Sinn Féin was reluctantly returning a favour to Labour for staying out of the 1918 general election, and Labour, in turn, could claim that while it had no parliamentary representation, it was influencing social and economic policy in Dáil Éireann, allowing them to argue for full representation at Bern. At 3:30 on the 21st of January 1919, Dáil Éireann convened at the Mansion House, the first meeting of a parliament on the island of Ireland in 119 years. There was a large crowd in attendance with at least 50 foreign journalists, and no attempt was made to stop the proceedings by the police, who instead helped to keep traffic moving. A raid on Sinn Féin headquarters on the 11th had netted them a draft of the Constitution and a draft of the Declaration of Independence. According to historian Maurice Walsh, Lord French, the Lord Lieutenant, deemed them so self-evidently ludicrous that the day before the Dáil was due to meet, the government removed the requirement for a police permit. This was because, in his eyes, Dáil Éireann was a joke. The puffed-up self-importance of déclassé politicians playing at being statesmen on the world stage, not realising that the rest of the world would laugh. What would be best for them, Lord French reasoned, was to experience the disappointment of having their upstart parliament ignored. Then the temporary fascination of the mass of the people would dissolve, and Ireland would return to a state of loyal normality. He would be proven very wrong. The entire proceedings were carried out in Irish, the first and only time that this would ever happen. Following a prayer by Sinn Féin Vice President Father Michael O'Flanagan and the appointment of Cathal Brugha as Ceann Comhairle, or Speaker, the roll was taken. Peals of laughter rippled through the audience as names like James Craig and Edward Carson were called out. Unionist leaders strongly opposed to Irish demands for independence. They and the Irish Parliamentary Party members who had refused to attend were marked down as Oslaughter, or absent. as the names of those arrested in the German plot were called, the response Feaglas ag Gaillimh, or imprisoned by the foreigner, was given. Liam Mellows, Diarmaid Lynch and Dr. Patrick McCartan were marked down as Erdibert ag Gaillimh, or deported by the foreigner. When Michael Collins and Harry Boland were called, someone responded Iloher, or present. However, neither of them were. Following the party at O'Kelly's house, they had boarded a ship for England and were on their way to assist in the escape of Eamon de Valera from Lincoln Prison on the 3rd of February. To fool watching British security, they had organised for someone to answer for them at the meeting of Dáil Éireann. Following this roll call, the Provisional Constitution was read. Containing just 6 articles, the Constitution was for the Dáil only and not the country. It provided for the creation of a 4-person Ariacht, or ministry, headed by a president. At a private meeting on the 22nd, Cathal Brugha was elected temporary president and he appointed Owen MacNeill to Finance, Michael Collins to Home Affairs, Count George Plunkett to Foreign Affairs and Richard Mulcahy to National Defence. It was taken as a given that this ministry would not function and was only in place until a full meeting of Dáil Éireann could occur, which happened in April. The Declaration of Independence ratified the Irish Republic proclaimed in 1916 and declared foreign government in Ireland to be an invasion of our national rights, which we will never tolerate, and we demand the evacuation of our country by the English garrison. Afterwards, Cathal Brugha told the assembled deputies in Irish, "You understand from this that we are now done with England." The message to the free nations of the world which followed was mainly aimed at those in attendance at the Paris Peace Conference and called upon every free nation to support the Irish Republic by recognising Ireland's national status and her right to its vindication at the Peace Congress. It was read in Irish, French and English before the democratic programme brought the first session to a close, and at 20 minutes past 5 standing orders were deferred until the following day. The first meeting was heavily stage managed and was more in line with a theatrical performance than a session of a parliament. Its main intention was to preempt Westminster, which would reconvene on the 4th of February, and to appeal to the Peace Conference, which was then in session. It was described by one attendee as dull, but electric to us believers. But not everyone was happy to see the cause of Irish freedom left in the hands of politicians. The Irish volunteers had been on a war footing since the beginning of the conscription crisis. At rallies, men were urged to get weapons, and pronouncements were made that the volunteers would fight and die free in Ireland instead of serving Britain on the Western Front. The ranks of the organisation swelled, and war was eagerly anticipated, a struggle that would unite the nation against a common enemy. But then, with the United States entering the First World War, the conscription crisis ended. Those who had joined the volunteers at the height of the threat left, leaving behind only the most militant to continue drilling in depleted units and with no conflict in sight. Officer commanding the South Tipperary Brigade, Seamus Robinson, would later write, "It was clear to me, too, that the pacifism of Sinn Féin was perceptibly gaining ground. General Headquarters would not give permission before the whole country was ready, yet common sense dictated that when the whole country was ready, they would probably all be in jail. We all heartily desired the formation of a republican government, but what I feared was that the government, once formed, being our moral superiors, a state of stalemate would be inevitable unless war was begun before the Dáil could take over responsibility." Without informing Volunteer General Headquarters, Robinson decided to take matters into his own hands and start a war before Dáil Éireann could meet. At Christmas, his vice officer commanding, Sean Tracy, told him that some gelignite would be taken to a nearby quarry in January, escorted by members of the RIC. The exact date wasn't known, so the volunteers lay in wait at Solo Hidbeg for a number of weeks, being joined by Robinson on the 16th, bringing the ambush party to 9 men. Robinson had given orders that if there were 2 RIC officers guarding the gelignite, they should be called upon to surrender. If there were 6, the maximum expected, they should be fired on without warning. Robinson's nerves frayed as the time passed, but at around 12:30 on the 21st of January, just 3 hours before the opening of Dáil Éireann, scouts reported that the horse and cart carrying the explosives was approaching, guarded by just 2 officers. When the convoy reached the ambush location, the volunteers jumped out and called on them to surrender. What happened next is unclear, but most reports say that the RIC were fired on while raising their rifles to shoot. Tracy fired the first shot, hitting Constable James MacDonald in the temple and killing him instantly, while another volunteer shot Constable Patrick O'Connell in the back. Years later, in his Bureau of Military History statement, Dan Breen wrote, "Tracy and I decided that we were going to shoot whatever number of police came along as an escort with this Gelignite, but we did not tell Robinson about this. Tracy had stated to me that the only way of starting a war was to kill someone, and we wanted to start a war." Although unpopular at the time, being condemned by the clergy and even members of Sinn Féin, the collision of the Solo Head Beg ambush and the opening of Dáil Éireann gave it significance in a wider struggle that had never really ceased since Easter 1916. At the end of the month, An Tagalach, the Irish Volunteers' official publication, declared that the formation of Dáil Éireann sanctions the employment by the Irish Volunteers of the most drastic measures against the enemies of Ireland. The soldiers and police of the invader are liable to be treated exactly as invading enemy soldiers would be treated by the native army of any country. Although it would be over a year before the arrival of the Black and Tans, and those in Dáil Éireann still believed in a peaceful solution, with this action at Solo Head Beg, the War of Independence had begun. If you want to follow the course of the Irish Revolution 100 years on, please subscribe to be kept up to date with videos and check out our Twitter and Instagram pages. Links are in the description. A chorda, thank you for joining me on The Irish Nation Lives. Slán go fóill.